Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another replay of another Boros Burn. As a friendly reminder, if you like modern-based content, please consider subscribing to the channel, as we aim to be the most informative modern channel for Magic the Gathering on YouTube, with a little bit of an emphasis on Burn, as it's been the bread and butter of the channel, but we do other decks as well. So this is a quick deck tech on the same Boros list we've been running for a couple of leagues now. Definitely will be changing things up in the next league that we do. But, you know, as I mentioned before, this is the basic Boros list, just kind of getting a feel for where the deck was in the meta. When I'm talking about the core of the Boros shells, once again, I always refer to these particular cards. These 24 cards are kind of almost the sacred cows of the main deck. You know, your Goblin Guide, Swift Spear, Eidolon, core of creatures, some number of, 4 Boros Charm, 4 Lightning Bolt, 4 Lava Spike. Really not a whole lot to be said. Land-based basically comes down to, do you want 4 or 5 of the Canopy lands, named after obviously Horizon Canopy, but Sunbaked Canyon and Fiery Islet being the ones the Burn deck plays. You know, do you want to play 4, do you want to play 5, or are you a little bit more willing to not play as many fetch lands with Searing Blazes? You know, it all comes down to details. Playing out those things. As far as the rest of the deck, Rift Bolt and Skewer, both very similar cards. They're both 3 damage, 3 spells, but under certain circumstances be cast for 1 mana. Rift Bolt, take a turn off, suspend it. It does leave it a little bit vulnerable in some spots, kind of telegraphing when you're playing it. Skewer the Critics is a little bit awkward in terms of sequencing, your spells, being able to cast it for 1 mana during a key turn when you're trying to burn your opponent out. But also can be quite nice that you can just cast this for 3 mana in some spots, 1 mana. Rift Bolt in that regard, they're both 3 damage, 3 CMC at their core. However, they both have certain circumstances where they can be cast for 1 mana. A lot of it comes down to, is time versus speed a premium? Kind of hard to say on these two. Rift Bolt obviously a little bit awkward in some post-board games with Roiling Vortex, as we're running 3 of in this game, so in those regards you might prefer Skewer the Critics in that, but oftentimes Rift Bolt you can cast in early turn sequencings with Monastery Swift Spear a lot easier. You can play the Swift Spear, suspend Rift Bolt next turn, you trigger it, whereas with Skewer the Critics sometimes you can't cast Skewer the Critics till after you've damaged with Swift Spear if you don't have any other spells in hand, or say you have a Searing Blaze trapped in your hand and your opponent has no creatures. It can be a little bit awkward when you're trapped on that 2 mana spot to cast Skewer a little bit more. Skullcrack, this kind of waxes and wanes with how much life gain there is in the format, whether you're dealing with Heliod Company, decks with just bringing in things like timely reinforcements and such. How many copies you want in the main deck kind of waxes and wanes with how much life gain you're expecting in your main deck, and also a little bit your sideboard configurations. How many anti-life gain cards do you want to cross for 75? Searing Blaze, this is probably, maybe outside of Eidolon, the most swingy card in the deck. Even in its worst matchups, Eidolon is still a Grizzly Bear that can attack your opponent. Searing Blaze, there are some decks in the format that just don't play any or many creatures at all, and it's just kind of a useless card. Jund can make it that way sometimes, Green Tron can make it that way, control decks, but on the other hand, those games where you go turn 2 Searing Blaze on your opponent's turn 1 Mana Dork, you almost can't lose those games. So this is one of the swingiest cards in the deck. But has the upside of being obviously 1 damage, 1 to a creature, 1 damage to a player. But landfall, it's 3 and 3. Another thing when you're playing this card is, as long as you initially can target both, your opponent has to stop both targetings for the card to fizzle. In other words, your opponent can't just kill their own creature and Searing Blaze doesn't resolve. Sometimes like what happens with Cryptic Command. But it is guaranteed to deal the 3 damage to your opponent if you can cast it and target them. And then obviously Lightning Helix. 3 damage, gain 3 life, no restrictions on targeting. Does, work with the white mana a little bit, so, things like Blood Moon sometimes can make this difficult to cast. But overall, This card's stock rises and falls with the number of aggressive decks you're expecting in the meta, particularly Burn Prowess in most tribal decks. It's not as effective against the Death Shadow decks, although with things like Scourge of the Skyclave becoming more and more a fixture of those decks, it's nice to have a card that could potentially kill a Scourge. You know, say you're at like 17 life and your opponent has a 3/3 Scourge, all of a sudden you're back at 20 life and your opponent's Scourge dies. Nice place to be. But this card is not at its all-time high in the burn lists right now. As far as the rest of the sideboard, 4 Path to Exile has primarily been an answer to the various Shadow decks, Heliod Company, etc. Core Firewalker, an answer to all the Izzet Prowess and Burn matchups. Rolling Vortex, once again, this is still a little bit of a holdover from the Cascade meta. This should probably go down to 2, but still fairly good against a lot of decks. It's okay against the control decks. It's pretty decent against the Heliod decks. Nice to have this in some number, but I would probably go down to 2 at this point. Wear Terror, once again, random people are playing Leyline of Sanctity. Don't like losing to that card if I possibly can have an out, especially when, you know, Chalice isn't at that all-time high. So if I'm playing a hate card for artifacts, I do want to be able to answer enchantments right now. You could argue I should splash for the 3rd color, but I don't particularly like splashing and burn most of the time anymore. Then finally, 3 copies of Relic of Progenitus. This is probably the most contentious, the one I get asked the most about. If Dredge is on the uptick, play Rest in Peace. If you're facing more mid-range value-based decks, like when Uro was a thing, or, you know, Snapcaster Mage decks, Tarmogoyf decks, Lurrus, Death Shadow decks, Relic of Progenitus is a much better card. It's a value card to deal with our graveyard, which allows you to redraw later in the game, whereas Rest in Peace just shuts off the graveyard. And a lot of times those decks can function without their graveyard, so it's nice to just have this card. Once again, this is not the strongest one against the various hard graveyard decks, whether that be Oops All Spells, Dredge. You know, Oops didn't die just because Simian Spirit Guy was banned. Sure, it's weaker, but I know Sodak's been working on it some here and there. Very fun card. I liked it primarily in the Dredge meta, not in the Dredge meta, in the Uro meta. I know a lot of people like Poseidon more on Surgical Extraction. I just like Relic better against these mid-range value decks that are using Tarmogoyf as one of their big hitters, or they're using Lurrus as a type of payoff, etc. It's just nice to have these, and especially if the Rakdos Dreadhorde Arcanist deck that was doing well in Historic and Pioneer and ends up start picking up at all in Modern. This is also kind of a nice card to have as a tech against that as well. So that's it. Let's get into some matches. Alright, we're back for match number 1. Unfortunately, we won the die roll, so we'll be on the play, which is nice. Opponent reveals a companion, which is Lurrus of the Dream Den. Most of the time, Lurrus in this format is a Death Shadow variant. This hand is decent against Death Shadow. We have some creatures backed by some burn spells. Obviously, 1-drop and Eidolon is one of our better starts, so we're definitely keeping this hand. Our opponent does mulligan to 6. We start with a Swizzle, Spear, and attack. They show us a Bogle. Okay, well, that makes things complicated. Play Eidolon and attack. It goes to 16. They do the thing. Play a Spirit Dancer. We just go ahead and bolt the Spirit Dancer. Attack. I think our opponent was on a little bit more of a value plan. They play Ethereal Armor for a 2/2 for a striker. We attack. They don't block. We Skull Crack. Put them to 2. Probably should have just cast Skewer the Critics, but they're locked under the Eidolon anyway. Don't see a ton of Boggles in the format, but this is one of the matchups that I kind of like having Wear Tear in. So let's get into some sideboarding. As far as looking at the sideboarding, I boarded out the 4 copies of Searing Blaze, 1 copy of Skewer the Critics, and a couple copies of Lava Spike here. So Searing Blaze obviously can't target creatures. You know, we can potentially kill Core Spirit Walker or Score Spirit Dancer in that one little window before they cast an enchantment on it. Not really worth keeping it in that regard. Lava Spikes, they're likely to bring in Leyline of Sanctity, so this is one of our weaker spells, potentially. Skewer the Critics, also boarded that out. Brought in a couple Path to Exile. Now, don't get me wrong, Path is not a good card at all in this matchup. However, sometimes they mulligan, so low because of Leyline that they have to keep like a core Spirit Dancer hand, or they load up on a Dryad Arbor, like say untap, or cast, crack fetch land and then turn Dryad Arbor, untap, cast a bunch of enchantments on it whenever we're tapped low, and then Path Exile is kind of the only way we can answer that. We don't really have like a, the one-drop prowess place. Soulscar Mage to like -X it down. So, we have to have Path Exile in those spots. Once again, not great, but you do need to clear their creatures out of the way a lot of times to win. Brought in the Wear Tears. They answer Leyline of Sanctity. They answer the Spirit Mantle. So, definitely some more important cards in the matchup that hits. So, that's why we brought in the cards we brought in. Let's see how it plays out in game number 2. This hand is very awkward. One land, Wear Tear, a couple Eidolons, a Roiling Vortex. I think on the draw this is potentially keepable. Looks like I agree. A little bit risky, obviously, from the standpoint of, if our opponent has a fast draw, we don't hit another land. They play Bogle into Bogle. They just beat us down with Boggles for now. We suspend a Riftbolt, keeping ourselves from doing some things. And this is where I was talking about where with Path to Exile, answering the core Spirit Dancer. It's already out of burn range. That was actually a kind of a dumb use of resources, if I would admit that. And then the Boggles doing the Boggles thing. And then we have no way of really racing from here. They have us on at best a 2-turn clock, and there's no way we're killing them in 2 turns. This having first strike means Eidolon's not a particularly great play. Once again, that was a very reactive hand, kept on the basis mainly of having Wear Tear to answer a Leyline, and they weren't even on a Leyline draw, they were just on a good Boggles draw. Sometimes Boggles mulligans to Leyline, sometimes they don't. A lot of it just depends on the nature of their hand. And, we had a very reactive hand relying on drawing a second land pretty quickly, and we really kind of failed to do that in a timely fashion. And the rest of our cards are just kind of, So, anyways, on to game number 3. In the sideboarding, didn't look like we really made any changes to the sideboarding we had from game number 2. On the play here, 4 lands. This is probably a mulligan, even though we have Goblin Guide. I also agree with my past self. 4 lands, but we can put one of those back. We have Goblin Guide into Eidolon, which is pretty reasonable in a lot of spots, so I do think we keep this, especially against potentially a Leyline hand. Opponent kept no Leyline at all. They snow-covered forest off of our Goblin Guide. They play a Bogle. We play an Eidolon, swing for 2. They get to do the thing. Make a big dumb idiot. We draw Wear Tear, which makes things quite interesting. I play Roiling Vortex here. Going for an attack, kind of hoping our opponent will block here. And then we can like blow up the Hyena Umbra, which we do. They gain a life, but then we just kind of put them in this almost irredeemable lock. They have a Path to Exile, which is fine. They go to 5, they go to 4, they play the core Spirit Dancer. You have the Hyena Umbra, which I don't even really care about at this point right now, because they're just dead between the Bolt and the Roiling Vortex, even without being able to attack in here. We Bolt, and then they're dead. Boggles is a tricky matchup. I'd still say it's not favorable for us, but, there are some things as a burn player. You can play Deflecting Palm, you can have Wear Tears in your sideboard, or Cinder Vines, or Destructive Revelry. or, there's a number of different things you can do. Obviously our opponent didn't have the best Boggles draws this game. There were no Leyline of Sanctities in these weird spots. But we were still kind of playing around Leyline a little bit here and there. It's nice to get a win. I've actually gotten quite a few wins over Boggles of recent note, both with Burn and with other decks. I honestly think it's a very poorly positioned, if not just outright unplayable deck in the format right now. Obviously, it's still a rough matchup for Burn and Prowess, but, if you're not beating Burn and Prowess at an extremely high clip, and you're struggling even against the Shadow decks, like, what's the point of playing your deck? Just my 2 cents. Would love to see this deck gone from the format. It's a rough matchup for Burn, but, if I'm even beating it with Burn, what's the point of playing the deck? Alright, we're back for match number 2 in this league. Sand is... We're on the draw, and Sand doesn't really have a lot of one-mana plays. Sure, we have Riftbolt. Beyond that, a lot of it is subjective to drawing another land. Searing Blazes obviously can be kind of so I think the Sand's a mulligan. Sand's pretty interesting. I think we put back the 3rd copy of Eidolon. Once again, we don't have a ton of things to answer creatures in this particular stuff. Opponent goes Arid Mesa, no play, which is kind of bizarre. Leads me to believe that we're up against Prowess, but then they Stomping Ground. So I have no idea what's going on. And then the Cathartic Reunion. That's a tricky matchup right off the bat. Play an Eidolon here because we really don't have a whole lot of other plays. Plays a Shriekhorn. We just try to get our opponent dead here as best we can, holding up Skullcrack as much as we can. Can't really afford to play the second Eidolon. They've played most of the spells they're going to play per game anyway. We go ahead and Skullcrack here. This is basically a 5-point life swing. We're going to 8. Turns their Bloodghasts on, which they don't have any, fortunately. They play an Ox. No, they can Flagrate us. Here come the Amalgam Idiots back. We Lightning Helix them. We Skewer them. And we kind of hope the top deck and that they don't get a chill, but they found a chill. They play an Ox, get a Narcomoeba, hit us to 1, and then there's nothing we can do from there. So, Dredge is another rough matchup, especially game number 1. Just the swings from Creeping Chills, especially when your opponent finds all 4 of their Creeping Chills. And we were still, 1 draw step potentially away from winning the game. Still kind of rough, but, Dredge is not as fast as it once was, but against Burn it doesn't matter as much with the Creeping Chills. They obviously lost Faithless Looting, they lost Golgari Grave Troll, but they still have a lot of powerful tools against us, mainly Creeping Chill. That's like the card that swung the matchup the most. Before that I would say it was a slightly favorable matchup, and now I would say it's unfavorable depending on how much graveyard hate you're packing. And remember, our particular graveyard hate of choice, for me at least, has been Relic. Not the best against Dredge, but let's get into some sideboarding. Alright, let's look at the sideboarding. So I decided to board out the 4 Eidolons and 3 Boros Charms. Brought in the 3 copies of Path to Exile, the 3 Relic of Progenitus. The 4 Path and the 3 Relic. Path also is not the greatest, but getting their creatures out of the way, once again, our creatures need to be able to connect for damage, as we're not going to be able to burn them out, generally speaking. One card you could consider bringing in, Roiling Vortex, but I think especially in the draw, it's just bad, especially since they're already bringing in, things like Nature's Claim, Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, I don't doubt they have Force of Vigor in their deck, but, answers to Artifact and Enchantment Hate anyway. So this is our hand. Not the best, but it does have a relic, so I do think we keep this hand. Once again, we don't have any huge amount of pressure, but we do have a quick Relic of Progenitus. We draw a second relic, suspend a Riftbolt, opponent does the thing. There's going to be a lot of needless quicking because, they lose a prized amalgam, but they have plenty still in their graveyard. You know, we do the thing, do the thing. Once again, let them dredge a little bit. Do I really care about a blood gas? No, I think I'll let the blood gas go. Not really a significant card overall. We just continue to hold up an activation of Relic of Progenitus. You know, the swingy cards in this matchup, obviously things like Ox, Conflagrate, Creeping Chill. That's a reason to pop a Relic of Progenitus. It's kind of a hard counter to a Creeping Chill. Also kind of negates their graveyard right now. They try, see, there's Assassin's Trophy I was talking about. Nothing else that we've seen as a hard answer to Graveyard Hate quite yet. They start pressuring us with Bloodghast. Bloodghast is not particularly scary. Burning Inquiry kind of annoying there, but shakes up our hand. They get to put graveyard stuff going on. They Ancient Grudge, which I guess is fine. They have this bad beatdown plan going, but more importantly, they have no cards in their graveyard. We just try to burn them out over a couple of turns, and then they're looking for some Creeping Chills, but we're able to kind of burn them out in addition to controlling them with the Relics of Progenitus. So, not the best hand overall. You know, we didn't have a ton of early pressure, but, you know, if you can keep their graveyard relatively under control, you know, their random dork beatdown plan can get there sometimes, but, you know, Burn's pretty decent at burning out by turn 5, turn 6, you know, even without investing a ton of resources in your opponent's creatures. You know, and Life Swing with Lightning Helix would have potentially bought us another turn. So, you know, and they showed us things like a Shenanigans and Assassin's Trophy, which Shenanigans, you never know if your opponent's on like a Grafdigger's Cage or Relic of Progenitus. You know, so that's like kind of a hedge. That's one of the things when you're playing Dredge is you kind of have to hedge against what your opponent's like various Graveyard Hate might be. Could be Leyline, could be Rest in Peace, could be Relic, could be Cage, could be Bomb, could be Lantern, Soul God Lantern. I'm trying to think of the name of the card. But anyways, on game number 3, see if we can steal a match from our second difficult match in a row. Look at sideboarding. We didn't make any changes to the sideboarding before we started the game. So we still have one Boros Charm in our deck as well, which can be nice in some spots. This hand is a little awkward. We have a Swiss Spear, we have a Skull Crack, we have a Searing Blaze if we draw a second land. On the draw, I could see keeping this hand, but I do think this hand's a mulligan, and I apparently agree. This hand's also very mediocre, but I think on 6 you have to keep it, probably put back a Path. What did I put back? Did not put back a Path. That seems incorrect to me. Oh, but either way, it does seem incorrect. We have Pithing Needle for Relic of Progenitus. We have Swiss Spear, which makes this hand a lot more tenable, especially when our opponent keeps basically nothing. They kept a land into Relic, or into Pithing Needle, which tells me that they had some type of, like maybe second land Cathartic Reunion kind of draw. And then we just kind of do the thing, put them to 1. Our opponent mills again, doesn't find anything. And that's one of the things I don't understand what kind of hand they kept exactly. Did they mulligan a lot? Nope, they kept a 7-card hand and did that. Kind of sketchy. Maybe they had like a Nature's Claim plus Pithing Needle to answer our Graveyard Hate. You know, they were doing the natural discard, which is a lot harder to do on the play. You know, and we had Double Path, which was kind of awkward. That one card that I put back, which I think was a Lava Spike. Maybe I should have kept that over the second Path. You know, a lot of things going on in this matchup, but usually Graveyard Hate's important. Sometimes the Dredge does mulligan itself into Oblivion. You know, a lot of it just comes down to, getting a little bit lucky in Magic sometimes. And I know people don't like to either overemphasize or underemphasize the nature of luck. But, when it comes down to it, you do need to get a little bit lucky. Opponent stumbles like they did or keep a bad hand. as far as what decisions could have been made on either side, opponent maybe should have mulliganed their 7-card hand. From our side, we probably shouldn't have kept it the second path. So, you know what? It never hurts to like look at what decisions could have been potentially changed to kind of like shift the balance a little bit in terms of like, you know, what could I have done or what could my opponent have done to affect the outcome of this match. So, anywho, that's going to be it for this video. We only had a couple matches in this one, but, you know, I don't want to overload people with content sometimes. Sometimes I think the longer videos, while it's nice to see entire leagues, you know, I do think, you know, especially, you know, when I'm doing these re-recordings or replays, so to speak, it's a lot easier to just kind of digest in like 20 or 25 minute video slots as opposed to like trying to do an entire replay in like 50 minutes or so. So if you like these kind of replay videos, please let me know. I might consider doing more of them. Or if you like the live play ones better, let me know why down in the comments. As always, this has been John for MTG Nexus.